On September 16, 2022, 22-year-old Mahsa Jina Amini died while in custody of the government's morality police for wearing improper hijab. This sent shockwaves throughout Iran. A massive protest movement commenced in response as Iranians demanded justice for Amini and equal rights for women. My name is Sydney Martin, and I'm the program manager and a researcher here at the Iran 1400 Project. I recently conducted interviews with a variety of scholars about the woman life freedom movement. Here's what they had to say.
I think there have been many positive effects of the Woman Life Freedom, Zan Zindagi Azadi, Jen Jian Azadi uprising in Iran. Many of them are really visible on the streets. We see that women have gained ground in terms of claiming more of the public space, more of their, exhibiting their private space, their bodily autonomy on the streets and elsewhere, and really just, claiming a foreground for women's movements in terms of claiming rights for the nation at large, not just for women, right? The Woman Life Freedom movement is remarkable because it has brought the revolutionary slogans of 44 years ago to a close in which there's been recognition that without women having their rights, the rest of the population won't truly have the kind of emancipation that people called for leading up to the 1979 revolution either. So even though they were silenced at the time and they were told, these rights are not important, they're secondary, there's been this recognition that actually without everybody having their rights, including half the population, which are women, and having true independence and true social justice, the rest of the population won't either. And so, we see that in effect on the streets, and we've seen it in the political discourses that have been, that we've seen coming out of Iran, whether it's physical and media discourses in terms of the, social media videos that we see, or actual manifestos and political speeches and articles, whereby women have led, but have been very much supported by men and by everybody in society. And so there's really been a transformation in society whereby not just among men and women, there's this understanding that without that kind of truly transformative, gaining of rights for women, there won't be any kind of transformation for society at large. But it's also been intersectional in terms of including and bringing in Iran's different ethnicities, different regions, different languages. So it's really been an intersectional movement that has united Iranians across the board. And I think that sense of it is also very much a gain of this uprising that will remain and that will have permanent effects for the future of the country. The obstacles have been great. As we know, the state has the disciplinary forces under its reign, whether it's the police on the streets or schools or prisons, or so state forces have gone very strongly and violently against protesters. We know that something like 15,000 people have been imprisoned, more than 500 people have been killed, many of them children. And coming up to the anniversary of the uprising, the parents of the children are imprisoned. A lot of journalists, academics are being purged from their positions. Many are being arrested and detained. So the movement has really faced a lot of internal violence and restrictions from the state in order to suppress it. And it has countered it really through the ever-present sort of, the minute and daily ways in which women have continued their push for their bodily autonomy on the streets. So it hasn't been dampened in, in all ways. In many ways, it is continuing in the speeches that are coming out from political prisoners, whether it's Nagis Mohammadi or Bahare Hidayat, all these declarations that are coming out from prisons, but also from actors and media personalities and writers and athletes. So all these declarations of support for the movement are very important in overcoming the obstacles, if not in very physical and practical terms, certainly in aspirational and ideational ways, which I think will have the longer effect for the movement, the more long-lasting, important effect for the movement. Other obstacles, of course, have been, the toxic environment among diasporic oppositions, whereby it's been difficult to have, if you've spent any time on social media, you will have seen the extremely vicious attacks that different groups will have vis-a-vis each other, whether it's royalists versus, whoever. And so these kinds of attacks that are oftentimes aligned with a far-right, adjacent discourse and were present before the uprising happened, have been detrimental to the movement and haven't really provided a kind of united front for Iranians inside Iran. But it's, if we're honest, it's not like it actually matters, because Iranians inside Iran have not been looking for leaders abroad. We saw this very clearly over the course of the last year, because they have their leaders within Iran. It's also a bit of a leaderless movement, as it has been called. So it's happening across the population in many different interesting ways. And Iranians have not actually been calling or looking for the kind of leadership that the exiled opposition has been offering. So all of that sort of noise that's been coming from that front, some of it, it's not all noise. A lot of it has been inspirational and important because there's been also the kind of solidarity we've seen from Iranians across the globe, but also from non-Iranians across the globe, supporting women's move for for this transnational feminist, transformation across the globe that lifts up everybody, not just women, right? All the people who are at the margins or underprivileged or at the receiving end of authoritarian politics. So there's been also a lot of really hopeful activity abroad in the diaspora. But I suppose one of the obstacles has been just this kind of toxic noise that has overwhelmed at least the conversation abroad. I don't think that's really affected internal, movements to the extent that the diaspora would like to believe, or those people who are engaged in it would like to believe it has. Right. So, in terms of institutional structures, anything that happens within the Iranian framework, within Iran as a country, has to be regulated and approved by the state, right? The Islamic Republic has very, very strong controls on those kinds of structures. So Iran had a very vibrant civil society that was taking root in the 2000s and late 90s and 2000s, and that was quashed subsequent to the 2009 Green Uprising, and hasn't really been allowed to find its footing again. In terms of, but then, we've seen human rights lawyers and other activists, journalists who've still upheld some of those ideals for a freer public space and civil society that is able to, just have a conversation or disagreement or counter the kinds of discourses and the kind of life that the state is prescribing for the population at large. It's difficult to think about any long-lasting structures without some kind of compromise by the state. We have not seen that. We have not seen the state agree to any of the goals or aspiration of this movement. Initially, there was a lot of hesitation we saw from state bodies and from, state officials, from former politicians or current politicians, people within the IRGC expressed doubt about the way that things had been done. And so what was interesting about this movement is that those fissures became exposed. And we saw that there's actually a lot of debate internally about some of these questions around hijab and social freedom and so on. But none of that has really been harnessed to propose ideas forward that would accommodate any of the requests of this movement. What we've seen, in fact, has been the opposite, has been extreme repression, especially leading up to the anniversary, whereby, these women who were on the streets and the men who were supporting, I mean, everybody, right? We say women, but this was a national uprising involving everybody. And in fact, the majority of those who've been killed have been young men and, alongside the women. But I think that they have now gone very strongly against all of them and just marked everybody as seditionists, as people who are influenced by wrongful thinking coming in from the West, coming in from the diaspora, coming in from, just everything, sort of this foreign invasion of, this menacing foreign invasion, which has been the regime discourse for decades. And so for now, I think rather than thinking of institutional and structural ways that some of these goals could be harnessed and lead to any kind of fruition, we have to understand this movement differently, in that it is happening very much across the country in the bodies of the people who are on the streets, who in their daily lives are living the kind of life that they are imagining for themselves. It's coming in minute and small ways of opposing the ways that they're countering, whether it's, restriction in terms of social freedoms, political freedoms. And I think we have to sort of, switch our understanding of how this movement's ultimately going to, in the long term, transform Iranian realities in ways that are not readily, perceptible. They are happening there in minute daily ways and really expressed through people's actions and bodies.